Welcome to our November 9th Board of County Commissioners business meeting. Welcome those of you who are joining us here in the Division II courtroom, and want to just repeat our thanks to District Court for letting us use this space while we work on getting the other space dried out and set up. So welcome everybody. I am just going to read a little bit about our public comment and how we conduct our meetings, and then we'll get started. So each action item on the agenda will offer an opportunity for relevant public comment about that topic. We do ask that you wait until the agenda item that you're here for comes up for discussion. Additionally, near the start of our meeting, we will invite folks to provide general public comment to the commission, which is a time for addressing issues not on today's agenda, but related to general county business. General public comment will not be recorded and shared on the county's YouTube site to ensure compliance with content policies. To hear public comment, individuals are always welcome to join us live on Zoom or here for our in-person meetings. We will first call on folks who are in person that wish to provide general public comment, and then again, agenda-specific comments later. Then we will turn to online commenters who are with us. And if you are on Zoom, please plan to use the raise your hand function when that time comes and listen for staff to call your name. All comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and we ask that everyone give their full name and Douglas County residence for our meeting minutes, please. All public comments should be directed to the County Commission. We also reserve the right to mute and remove any speaker who is vulgar, rude, or inappropriate. The public should also know that comments received by the Commission during our meetings do not represent the views of the Douglas County government. If visual aids are used during the meeting, the presenter will share their screen. However, please know online participants will not be able to, who may be listening, but don't have a screen on a computer, smartphone, or tablet, won't be able to view them during the meeting, but all materials are published online for your reference. And lastly, a recording of this meeting will be available on our YouTube page and website. So with that, we don't have a consent agenda, so we're going to jump right into general public comment. And I have a couple folks signed up, and I call you, if you're here for an agenda specific item, but you signed up, let me know and we can just wait and we'll circle back around. But I will go ahead and call these names. So Sherilyn Wells, our regular business agenda. Item 2.1 is a 2023 legislative statement. And do we have online presenters, or Jill, are you doing that for us? All right, go ahead.
I'm going to start. I'm going to, I think Mallory Lutz with Little Government Relations is going to come up and talk through the items that are in the draft legislative statement that we provided in the packet. What I didn't state in the packet and that we fully anticipate today is that this is the first time you all have looked at this and discussed it. So while there is a draft recommendation to approve it, you can certainly do that if you want to, but if there's modifications to it, changes you want us to go back and make, this is just the first conversation and your first chance of having a conversation with Mallory, and Stuart's here as well if need be. But I might let Mallory come up and maybe talk a little bit about the highlights that are in there, and she's available for questions. I'm available for questions. Yeah, I'm not sure where y'all would like to start.
Okay, thank you, Jill, for that introduction. And I know the circumstances are kind of extraordinary, it being the day after an election day. So if I don't talk about something that you want to talk about, we can absolutely do that too. But you'll have the platform in front of you, and I'm not necessarily going to talk through each and every item that's on there. I think probably the bulk of these items I think are familiar to us and are similar to some of the things we talked about last session. But you'll notice, I think it's expanded a bit because of really two kind of particular and extraordinary things that are happening. One of those being Panasonic and the other being the bipartisan infrastructure law. You'll notice several references to both of those sprinkled throughout the platform. So I might just take a few minutes to go through both of those things, and then we can kind of circle back to the platform. But starting first with the bipartisan infrastructure law, and I bring this up really because we're getting lots of questions from folks that we work with in local government that, here's this historic thing that has been handed down from the federal government, and it really feels like we have little guidance and more questions, more questions than guidance at this point. So I kind of wanted to share a little bit about what we know so far, and then that might kind of help figure out where we go from there. So high level overview of the bipartisan infrastructure law. 50% goes to transportation, roughly 20% for energy, power, and broadband, and then the remaining for water resiliency and environmental remediation. So the big number to keep in mind, nationwide level is $1.2 trillion. But what does that mean for us here in Kansas is $3.8 billion through formula funds. So this is where it gets a little tricky. The 3.8 billion is something that comes through formula funds, 60% of the total, and then the remainder is 40% of competitive grants. And so I think that's where a lot of the questions are happening right now in terms of how do we get those, what are they, and what can we use them for? So because almost the majority of this process is competitive grants, it means the responsibility falls on local governments to seek funds for what you need. I do want to give some number breakdowns, and don't worry about necessarily capturing all these because we will have an updated report for you tomorrow covering all the things that happened last night, as well as some of this stuff too. So, but I think it's important to get some of the figures in our head to figure out what we're dealing with here. So the 3.8 billion, how that kind of breaks down, high level overview, federal highway aid, of course, is the bulk of that, 2.6 billion. Bridge replacement and repair, 225 million. Public transit, 272 million. EV charging network, we can talk a little bit more about that. Some historic funds coming to Kansas for that, $40 million over the next 5 years. And I should clarify, it is 3.8 billion over the next 5 years. Water infrastructure is also a large portion of this, $454 million. And then some other things like cyber attacks and wildfires, all those new things we're having to deal with in the 21st century. So entirely new funding over the 5 years will be 445 million for highways, 225 million for bridges, and then, as I mentioned, the 40 million for electric vehicles. So a little bit more about what this means for local governments, at least to the degree that we know at this point. As I mentioned, I think we have many more questions that are unanswered than answered at this point, but it is certainly clear that we need more guidance and support in order for locals to be successful in securing these grants for what you need them for. I will mention at the Infrastructure Summit in July, so KDOT has kind of convened what's called the Infrastructure Hub, stakeholders that are interested in how we deal with these funds. So in July, the U.S. Department of Transportation was there to offer a little bit of what they know at this point, and they talked about the following 3 things: workforce, how you can partner with the state unions, community colleges, high schools. It makes me think of things like Peasley Tech that you have right here in your backyard. For apprenticeship programs and things like that. And so if you are making those local connections, that is certainly something to highlight when you do apply for these grants. The second thing, talk about how projects will be resilient to extreme weather and natural disasters. Obviously, I think February 2020, even though that was over 2 years ago, is still very much in folks' mind. And so as those things happen, highlighting what we can do about those. And the last thing being, if a project is in an underserved community, really making that clear on those applications. So DOT laid out this process in July in kind of a 1-sentence description. And so, they'll put out notice of funding, how to apply, and then basically local governments look at how they're eligible, submit an application, and the Department of Transportation reviews and announces those awards. So it sounds like a simple process, but clearly it's not, because people have a million questions at this point. So the little bit of info we have from KDOT at this point is that they will be using a sliding scale. And so depending on the size of your community, how many resources you have available to you, if you're a smaller community, for example, with fewer resources, that will be dealt with on a sliding scale. Again, I don't know the specifics of that or what that will look like, but that is what I know at this point. Just a last couple things about the infrastructure law at this point. So the competitive grants for local governments, it sounds like these will be kind of in topics or categories. I believe there's like 12 that the U.S. Department of Transportation has laid out. I won't go through all of those, but for example, some of them are bridge investments, railroad crossing eliminations, culvert removal, healthy streets, rural surface transportation programs. So it just runs the gamut of everything you could possibly imagine for infrastructure improvements. I'm happy to take questions on the infrastructure law, or I can go ahead and talk a little bit about Panasonic and then can circle back.
Carry on.
Okay. Okay. So, and I invite Sarah and or Jill to stop me if I say anything that shouldn't be shared. but I wanted to share that we met, had our kind of our first preliminary meeting with Commerce last Friday to talk about, we're very excited about this opportunity, but also, right, a little worried about all of the things that this is going to mean for us. But really, how can Commerce best help support us so that we can really rise to meet this extraordinary opportunity that's going to be in the region? So share a little bit about the timeline that they shared with us. The facility footprint, I guess, is almost completed. It's just astounding, a 3 million square foot facility almost completed. In the immediate future, they're talking 12,000 to 16,000 construction jobs. And so immediately your mind goes to, where do those people stay? Where do their kids go to school? All of those sorts of things. And then, of course, the number I think that's in most everybody's minds is the 4,000 permanent jobs. 1,700 of those will be coming from out of state. So we really have a great opportunity here to draw people into the community and into the region. Target date for completion is operational by first quarter of 2025. Apparently Tesla is planning to roll out their EV trucks or whatever those are going to be called. So meeting that demand for batteries to get down to Texas by first quarter of 2025. So opportunities, I choose the term opportunities maybe rather than concerns that we discussed with them. Housing obviously is probably one of the foremost concerns at this point in terms of where do we house people in the immediate near term, but then also longer term. And I think one thing for us, you'll probably recall from last session, we talked about some really historic and significant housing legislation passed the legislature last year. Most of those bills had to deal with smaller rural counties, which was great. But none of those really help us right now with this project. And so potentially talking about, how can we revisit some of those and make those work for this region as it seeks to meet the demand for workers. And also things like the Rural Housing Incentive District. I know that that's helped with Baldwin City this past year, but thinking about how might we tweak that so it could help a few more communities in the area. And then a brief conversation about how other industries are impacted. So kind of thinking about this in the long term of something interesting conversation about battery recycling, right? Something we've probably never had a conversation about before. And so thinking in the long term of how does this fit into our local conversations in terms of sustainability and conservation. And so really just acknowledging this, that something like that is a significant opportunity as, all our major US automakers shift to all electric in the next 15 years or so. A couple of other things, workforce, of course, is huge. One thing that was discussed, partnering with KU, you all have great relationships with KU and the Innovation Park and Peasley Tech. And so I think that's something that we'll continue talking with Commerce about to expand on those opportunities. And then of course, transportation. And this, again, it's all connected, ties back into the infrastructure law. But of course, K-10, huge topic of conversation. Probably one of the things that landed the projects, but also one of the things that will make it viable into the future. In terms of lane increases, how do we make this safe for freight versus passenger traffic, all of those things. And then kind of the last thought that Commerce left us with is that this really will come down to collaboration. And this is not just, an insular county by county, city by city. This is really how do we work together to maximize on all of these opportunities. So that's why you will see so much about both of those things I just talked about in the platform. I think there's almost something about them on every page, but there's specific sections where we do call those out because I think it will be a huge part of what's talked about over the next session and over the next couple of years. So happy to answer the questions I can. If you want to know about anything else, we can also talk about that too.
Thank you, Mallory. Questions from other commissioners? Go ahead.
I was just gonna note, you talked quite a bit about, water being one of the things that are infrastructure wise or could be included in some of the BIL. I did notice that water was not specifically spelled out in the document that we have, and I'd like to see that there, especially since it sounds like you're going to be adding quite a few things based on last night's activities. So just water as a resource in the resource list so that we can kind of keep an eye on legislation that might be impacting Kansas for water use, water quality.
I absolutely appreciate you bringing that up, particularly since we have a newly formed water committee at the legislature, that has done work over the interim, both in rural issues, if you think about the Walla Aquifer, but also in terms of how we use water in urban areas and GMDs and all that. So absolutely, thanks for bringing that up.
And the other piece would be to make sure, because I know that the CIC license, the Crisis Intervention Center license is going back to the legislature. So make sure that we kind of keep eyes on that and make sure that there are healthy discussions around how that can benefit mental health, behavioral health as we move forward in our community and also for others.
Any questions, Commissioner Kelly?
You're on. You don't have to turn it on. Does he? Oh, sorry.
You're the
Yeah.
odd one
The
out.
rest of us are all on, but you. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. I don't call that for just saying, no, I don't have any really questions. There's just some things I'm happy to see.
I don't have any questions either. So Sarah, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I just want to add that I really appreciated Mallory and Stuart organizing that conversation with Commerce. And we were able to invite our partners at the Lawrence Chamber and EDC. So Bonnie Lowe was there as well as Rob Richardson. And I think it was really helpful for them to hear directly from the Deputy Secretary. And he was super helpful and knowledgeable in that space. And I really appreciate their organizing it. I do think, they talked a lot about transportation, but I'll tell you, they talked about transportation to the east. It's important to remember with this conversation that Johnson County negotiated this deal. So the infrastructure that's planned to happen in this is happening to the east. So if I think, if we are looking for as improvements to come west and how that connectivity comes west, either through K10 or I-70, I think we've got some catching up to do in some of that regard. But I appreciated he was just really candid about that. They put incentives on the table to get that project. And so we're going to have to think about what things does Douglas County or the cities in Douglas County want to bring to the table to attract that. And I think they gave us some ideas too. Fire suppression, fire is still an issue. While these are not fire hazards, it's a giant building, so it will need protection. So there are still some things that they're working on in that regard that I think that they were some potential opportunities that we could talk through with partners as to, what could be done. But and I think this recycling conversation was super interesting. Their plan is for it to be full life cycle right there, here, that all these batteries would come back and they would be recycled and reused because those parts and materials are so important. So it's a huge potential industry that we've not even remotely talked about. So I think there's some potential.
And you're well poised for it. I think the two
Yeah.
things they said you need for battery recycling are access to rail service and access to power source. And you've got those two things. So
Yeah, so that was big. Thank you.
I just have one question. It's not related to Panasonic or the infrastructure bill, but just based on, I'm glad and well, I'll say I'm glad and sad to see that yet again, we are promoting and pushing for Medicaid expansion. So I wish that we were not in that position any longer. I'm just wondering if you can give a sense of, from your perspective, where that conversation lies. And I know that's kind of a dicey conversation the day after an election, maybe, and there's some unknowns, but if you have any sense of momentum there, I would appreciate hearing it.
sure. And Stuart may have a different opinion, but my read of the situation to less than 24 hours out is even though this is a new situation, I think that you've seen how things have operated over the last 4 years, specifically over the last 2 years, when you have a supermajority of the opposite party controlling the legislature, and the other party controlling the governor's office, and what that lends itself to. And so I wouldn't say that we're going to be in for any surprises necessarily. I mean, I think it will kind of be this continued battle on issues that people are always going to butt heads about. I certainly don't think that, unfortunately, things will probably change with the Medicaid expansion conversation, but I think there are opportunities in the midst of that to try to figure out how can we make progress. So if you think about things, I mean, there's some changes to Medicaid coming up, right, in terms of reprocurement. That's the time that we start talking about that. And so, you know, there's always creative ways that we can figure out how can we better serve people given the circumstances that we're in. I think there's conversations to be had about how do we maximizing Medicaid usage with what we have to work with. So probably not the answer you wanted to hear, but not necessarily Medicaid related too, but I mean, there will be continued conversations about mental health. I mean, the CCBHC, which we briefly mentioned in the platform, 988, right? We're in the first 6 months of that. And how do we talk about maybe a more sustainable funding source for that? And so I think we can still have some of these conversations and make progress, but it's probably not going to look like conventional Medicaid expansion passing. So
Fair point. I appreciate that. And yes, to your point, I'm hopeful that with CCBHC and more mental health initiatives and funding structures kind of moving forward and gaining momentum across the street, that linked conversation might help nudge some people along past the resistance to it. But I appreciate that it's a creative conversation we have to continue figuring out how to have. So thanks for that. Does that bring up any other questions for commissioners before I open up for public comment? Okay, thanks.
Great document, and thank you for the work on this.
absolutely. Nice to meet you. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. Is there anybody here who wishes to provide public comment on this item? Please come forward. Just a reminder to state your name and residence, please.
Teresa K. Wilkie, 3221 Yellowstone Drive, Lawrence, Kansas, 66047. I want to point out to the commissioners that the site of the Sunflower, the Panasonic development, is still subject to Department of Army's PFOS and PFAS survey for pollution to the underground water. So as we go into the future on this site, let's not do it again, number one, and let's not it was interesting to me, Mallory says, well, there's all this talk about water. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, because Department of Army, although they keep their mouth very shut about the dangers of PFAS and PFOS, it's a dangerous substance. And so we need to make sure that they complete their survey for the safety of the people working there and for the people downstream. That's Johnson County. I mean, it's not our job, but thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. Anybody else that would like to provide public comment on this item? Okay, see nobody in person. I'll double check if anyone online has raised their hand. Okay, thank you. We'll close public comment and bring this back for discussion or any further comments from commissioners.
Go ahead and just make a couple comments about some of the things I'm pleased that are in here. So the first one is Medicaid expansion. I mean, I understand that we need to have creative discussions, but quite honestly, we have the money to fund this. It's ridiculous that we're not. We have partners here tonight who would truly benefit from that expansion. And it, you know, we have people who are asking about housing in Douglas County and
I think you need to have that. Yeah, if you can pull the microphone a little closer to you.
Okay.
Sorry,
How about now?
that's good.
All right, there we go. So backing up, mostly it's about Medicaid expansion, and I'm happy to see it in here. I know we have partners here who this would make a huge impact to the treatment and recovery center and our entire healthcare system. It's about housing and some of the issues that we're having with homelessness. And quite honestly, there's no reason. Every state around us has done it. I'm worried about losing workforce continually to other states because of this. And so I'm happy to see that in here. And I'll just hit a couple of things that I'm happy to see. And the next one would be our criminal justice partnership. We're getting good news coming from bids, but we need more funding. And so I was glad to see that in there. And Mallory, it may need to be stronger. It's just sort of a one sentence thing. And I guess that was one that jumped out to me. And then we've talked a lot about Panasonic today, but we've got to talk about early childhood care. We've made an investment in early childhood care. We need it desperately in Douglas County. We can bring all these families in. That's great. But we also have to think about folks at the early end of the spectrum. And maybe one more thing. And Matt, this may be something we want to talk about is senior care as well. There really isn't a lot in there about care for seniors and reimbursement rates, and some of that is federal, it's not state, but we've got to come up with a better way to fund the care for seniors in our community. They continue to grow, and we continue not to have not many resources coming from the state level to help support care for seniors across the state. So those are just a couple that I picked out that I wanted to emphasize. And as it sounds like Mallory and Stuart are going to continue to work on that draft and give us another pass at this.
Shirley? This is Commissioner Reed, I agree and I really appreciate I think that this document represents well sort of some big values for Douglas County and things that really that this commission and our staff have been working towards for a long time. And I'll just, Commissioner Kelly kind of highlighted all the ones that I was particularly glad about, and also happy to see the support of the food programs and systems and those specific things that I also hope are gaining some momentum and start to really secure our local food economy and ag producers and in some new ways of reimagining what that looks like as things shift and change. And so I just appreciate your work on this. I don't think I have anything to add that I don't believe is sort of represented in terms of values and major things that we believe in. So I just appreciate your good work, and we'll echo Sarah's comments earlier that the help in convening that conversation and really making sure that we are engaged with the Department of Commerce and state leaders around how this progresses, because I think that it's going to start to feel like some rapid progression and really rapid impact. And so I just appreciate that you're helping us have those statewide conversations and convene with our neighboring counties and partners too. So thank you for your time. Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'd add, I'd like us to be keeping ears out for regenerative agriculture conversations at the state legislature, because it's one thing to conserve prime farmland, but it's how we treat it that matters for how it gets carried into the future for environmental purposes and future food production. So I know there's a lot of bills that come through the agriculture committees of both the House and the Senate to make sure that we're keeping an eyes and ears on that too. I know we're quite a bit of an urban county, but we also have a lot of farm ground too that we need to be a voice for that.
Thanks, Commissioner Worley. Okay, well, with that we will thank you again, Mallory and Stuart. We'll move on to our next item sorry, did staff have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say, do we want to set a date on when we want to bring this back to the commission?
Yeah, we can shoot to bring it back next week. Or
Turn it in tomorrow. So
sorry, that's true.
Maybe
We'll
the
plan
30th?
for the 30th. That
Okay.
sounds perfect. Thanks, Sarah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Thank you for closing the loop on that. Okay, now we'll move on to item 2.2. Brooke, you're about to stand up, so is that your cue? Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Included in your packet tonight is the comprehensive capital improvement program document that we reviewed in depth a few weeks back during our work session. I would be happy to answer any questions as it relates to finance, the facilities portion of the capital improvement plan in front of you today. If you do have more specific questions about mechanical or road and bridge projects, I would be happy to invite my colleagues here from Public Works and Maintenance to answer any of those project-specific questions. I do not have a formal presentation for you guys tonight, but I'm happy to stand for any questions or invite folks up.
Commissioners, do you have any questions for Brooke?
Don't have any questions for Brooke.
Commissioner Willie?
I had an extensive time to talk with Brooke over some of my questions, and she was very helpful. And I'm very proud of the document that's put together and the level of expertise that goes into creating these.
Thank you. I don't have any questions for you either, Brooke, specifically. I don't know, are you sharing in this presentation with Chad perhaps? Is Chad coming up next? Okay.
Yes, yes. So my portion would just be the facilities portion. So if there's no questions about that, I'll go ahead and swap spots and bring Chad up.
Okay, thanks,
Thank
Brooke.
you, Commissioner.
Good evening, Commissioners. I was not planning on coming up. I thought we could take care of it. We had our study session a couple of weeks ago. We've put a pretty extensive document together that goes into detail about all of our projects. A lot of it is carried forward from years past, so some of, a lot of it should be familiar. Some of it is new. We try to give full transparency about why we make decisions and why we prioritize. So hopefully the document speaks for itself, and I am here to answer questions if you have them. So thank you.
Thanks, Chad. Commissioner Kelly, do you have any questions for Chad?
My question for Chad and maybe for Sarah as well is we've sent a letter to the city asking for their position on the funding agreement for Wakarusa Drive. I know we don't have that back yet. I'd be interested to hear from you and from Sarah, without that back, that's written into the plan as that fund sharing agreement. How do we look at a plan when we don't know what our partners are going to be spending on it?
Sure. Well, we would have to take a different approach if the city doesn't want to put funds in that project. And that is not spelled out in the capital improvement plan as it's written. I think I mentioned when we met earlier that it would be possible to take 2 bridge projects probably in 2026 and bump those, and that would generate funding that would cover the gap.
Or we could identify future funding sources in 2023. Sorry to interrupt you.
Okay. Yeah, so, the project would be, construction would start in 2025 at the earliest. Now, there would be money that needs to be spent immediately. We need to hire an engineering firm and get working on it. We need to survey the ground and start looking at design options. And so we're looking to spend money soon. We would not do that without additional meetings and authorization from you. So the capital improvement plan is kind of our, here's where we want to go. And then when we actually move forward on this project, it would be us coming to you and saying, okay, we found an engineering firm that has submitted a proposal and we want to hire them for this dollar amount. That would really be the drop dead of we're going to spend money on this. We could also insert a step before that when you get a response from the city to say, okay, now it's time to formally say, what are we going to do with this going forward? So there's an opportunity just to have a meeting to authorize us to proceed. As simple as that.
Yeah, I think that's what I'd add, Commissioners, just that since this, it's almost the end of 2022. This is the 2023 CIP for an adopted budget that was adopted this summer. Pretty soon, before we know it, we're going to start working on the 2024 budget. My anticipation is that we would know in advance of decisions related to the 2024 budget and the 2024 CIP, what the intentions of the city is in terms of that project. That would allow us an opportunity to look at funding models in 2024 to support that project. And obviously those would be commission decisions related to that project. But we could, I think we have time to adopt this CIP and make those adjustments if we learn something different from the city in 2024. Chad, did I say anything there that makes you nervous?
The only thing I would add is that, our thought was that if we could get this project bid with the traffic way, tie it to the bid and have it bid by KDOT, that we would save significant dollars on construction. So if we delay too far as a commitment and don't get the design started and we don't hit that bid date, then we would be on our own bidding this project. And at that point, it would be a completely separate project from anything KDOT's doing. So that's the only concern there. We really were hoping, I mean, KDOT's going to be building 15 or 20 bridges to expand the traffic way. So the addition of one is for a contractor, very cost effective. So that was where we were pointed.
When do you think they're going to do those bids?
Well, that's what the construction pipeline has established. They announced this summer that it's going, and that would be 2025 bid date for certain. And so we've got a 2.5-year design and bidding kind of window for this project we want to do. So we're kind of starting to compress that already. When we were talking seriously with the city 6 months ago, we were already reviewing engineering proposals to get going. So we are starting to compress that overall timeline. But the more important thing is to make a decision and know that we want to do this. So it's like all of the projects in the capital improvement plan. If you're looking at a project that we're building next year and it's already been bid, we're all fully committed to that. If you're looking at a project that's listed in the CIP for 5 years from now, it's kind of an indicator of where we think we want to go. And it's an agreement with everyone about, what we think we want to spend money on. And so it's really, when you look at these projects, you got multiple opportunities for official authorization. We've got the engineering, typically we hire, we have to buy right away. We have to ask for permission to solicit bids. We receive bids, we have to ask for your authorization to award the contracts. Multiple steps. So, this project is going to have those in large numbers. And so that's going to take a full 2 years to get all that done. And it's kind of time to get moving. So yeah, so in terms of the fallback position, if we readjust the schedule on a couple of bridges, we could cover the gap. I think one thing that's been said is that there's a $9 million price tag. It's really less if the city's not in. We would not do a shared use path. We'd probably scale back on the open space adjacent to the park and try to buy as little right away as possible. So it's not a $9 million, it might be an $8 million number. And we currently have $5,270,000 allocated cash in hand to do this right now. So the gap will be pretty easy to close if we have to.
If you said there will be considerable savings, if we bid this project, if we decide to go ahead with this project and we bid this project with the South Lawrence Traffic Way, I won't hold you to this, but do you have an idea of, it could be costly if we delay and wait for the city. Do you have an idea of that number? And if you don't, that's fine. I'm just trying to get my mind around what, balancing these demands.
Over the years, we've gone into periods where bids are lower than expected, kind of as a trend. And now we're currently in a phase where they're higher. And then all of a sudden you open a bid and it's lower. I mean, it's right there. There's enough fluctuation that it's difficult to answer that. But absolutely on a project that is $130 million project, if we add $7 million of construction to that, that's going to get some very good unit pricing. It's absolutely going to lower it. It could be 15 or 20% savings.
Can I just, would something the commission like is if we prepared some scenarios of if the city did not participate in the project, what the timing would be and what our recommended funding change would be perhaps to CIP? Is that an option the commission would like to see and consider? I guess what I'm concerned about is holding up an entire capital improvement plan document for one project when that project can be amended and changed and would have to come back to this commission before any changes were made. So, would that be a possible scenario to approve the CIP, have staff look at, if the city chose not to, what those timelines are? Could we access some additional cash, or would there be a delay on the CIP in a project in a future year? Bring that back to the commission so they'd have more information related to that. Either hopefully we hear from the city soon. I'm not anticipating that we would not hear from them in months. I'm hoping it is a month. but it's just, would that be something that'd be helpful in making that decision as opposed to holding up the entire plan?
I don't know that I'm ready to answer that, yes,
Mhm.
Sarah.
What do you think, Bob?
Listen a little more to my fellow commissioners and hear some public comment too on this item. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit though about, Chad mentioned delaying some bridges, and I want to go back to that, what that means, but can you talk, you said we could identify other funds.
Well, one of the things that we've done in the past, commissioners, is particularly as we approach year end, how we try to manage our year end fund balances. Generally the county comes in pretty good, strong financial position as we approach year end. Assuming we meet all our fund balance targets for the beginning of the year, it's pretty routine for us to have $1 million to $2 million that we have allocated towards, into the CIP or into equipment reserve. This could be a top project for us to allocate additional funding for. So, and push it towards the CIP. And we could even do that in 2023. Brooke's still here. And we've done that kind of work before and made that amendment to the 2023 budget when we're working on the 2020. We're doing the 2023 reestimate. So, I think that's a potential source of funds that would not require a delay of bridge projects in an out year. And because I would want Chad to fully consider that, like, what does that mean for our bridge program? I also, don't want to sell the importance of the city of Lawrence's participation in the project. I think we still feel it's vital that they participate, and that is inconsistent. It's consistent with our agreements with them, as this project does border the city limits for a substantial portion of the road project. So that's why perhaps I have not brought it forward at this point, but that's a pretty routine thing for us to do at year end, is to allocate those funds and make some of those decisions in 2023.
Thank you.
Any questions from you, Commissioner Willie?
I know Chad and I had a long conversation, and one of the things we talked about was the schedule of bridge replacements and evaluating bridges and how often that gets done. And also that, we're keeping on top of the bridges that need attention now, but there's also a kind of a large slug of bridges built in the 70s that may come down the pike all at once. Was it the 70s? It was where some of those will start timing out in large numbers. And so just kind of keeping an eye for, not only do we get to keep up with the work that we have, but not reallocating funds if we don't need to, and we know that the bridges are critical infrastructure too. So I'm happy to hear from the public, and I think we'll probably have more questions for you, Chad. So
I don't have any other questions at this time either, so we'll go ahead and open this up for public comment before bringing it back for further discussion. So I know I'll go back to this list and go ahead and call Terry up first. Terry, still there? You are.
Okay, Teresa K. Wilkie, Terry Wilkie, 3221 Yellowstone Drive, Lawrence, Kansas. Thank you, commissioners, for your good work. If you can't tell by now, I'm an environmentalist. And my position on this Wakarusa extension is that it is counter to the Plan 2040 that asks us to use our infill land instead of extending things farther. I went to the town hall. I did hear clearly the county's position that there needs to be fire and medical to that corner of the county. And I was frankly scandalized to hear that we built a lake across the county before I lived here and made these people without fire and medical that live out in the county. And there's few of them compared to the demographics of the people that live in the city, but they're people too. And so I'm going to suggest that it would be a very good idea to simply build a fire and medical station for them out there. And so I did a little Google research on this. And there's a proposal to build 2 fire stations in Douglas County, Kansas right now for 18 mil. That's 9 mil each. So that could be done with the same amount of money that this is in the CIP to build this extension. I'm currently traveling north on the South Lawrence Traffic Way at about 9 o'clock every morning. And there's a lot of dead animals on that road that would demonstrate that this is a wildlife corridor, that this is, or that the state is not good about cleaning up dead carcass, but I trust they are, and there's data on that as well. And I really defend our riparian land and our wildlife corridor and the beliefs of people who have fought this extension for many, many years. So I'm opposed to spending this kind of money where it could be done later or used right now to make fire and medical in that part of the county. Thank you.
Thank you. Thad Holcomb.
First of all, can you all hear back here in the back? I didn't think so. Some can, some can't. It is really difficult to hear in the back. I don't know if we can do anything about it.
Turn it up a little.
I know this is a new building, so you're not sure who's hearing what. You know. Chad, I want you to repeat everything for me. By the way, Chad Boyd has been nothing but helpful with us, and I'm representing Lettuce in another issue regarding the county. And thank you for that. Again, I want to thank for the opportunity to speak with you. I'm Thad Holcomb, and I'm speaking on behalf of Ecology Teams United in Sustainability, Lettuce. And I think you as commissioners are familiar with who we are, but those in attendance may not be as familiar. I'd like to describe us as an interfaith network of 9 different Earth Care groups that are Roman Catholic, representing Roman Catholic, Protestant, Unitarian Universalists, Muslim, Jewish, and Zen Buddhist faith traditions in Lawrence. We are diverse in those ways, but are in agreement that our faith traditions ask us to speak on behalf of the earth in ways that remind us that we are a part of the web of life and not the pinnacle or a species superior in our society, which, by the way, primarily expresses itself in a patriarchal way. So my comments may well be philosophical and even theological, but they are also important, very principled ways that we think we'd like to oppose the extension of the Wakarusa Avenue. Now you're going to hear other people, and already you've heard some who've expressed their concerns. And it was certainly well expressed in the article I'm sure all of you read in this morning, Lawrence Journal World by Mr. Allman. He was interviewed with Sustainable Action Network. Well, you know, in addition to our musing about this concern, we have a question. Why are we having to even discuss this issue? What is the perspective and values that have sustained the wanting to extend a street, a paved path for cars and trucks, into an area that is outside of the city limits, beyond the 2040, into an area that is going to begin the development of extending the urban borders of Lawrence? It has been said that such, it's not, ma'am, I don't have more than a minute because I spent some time talking back there about hearing.
I started when you started.
Oh, did you?
Yep.
Okay. It's been said that such as, but we disagree. It's like a faucet with a small drip, and eventually it becomes a stream. So we're here, believe it or not, possibly imposing an endeavor similar to that of use of plastic bags. That may seem to be a bit exaggerated, but consider one of the main reasons for having plastic bags is we as humans survive without years. And that is, we did without them. And so they're convenient, that we're addicted to convenience. And I see myself struggling with that convenience. I'm simply saying, I think we're having a similar kind of addiction to the idea of progress. We're going to build it because it's more efficient, it's quicker, it's something that we have funds to do with, and addiction is difficult to admit and difficult to go beyond. But if we do not curtail this road, we are in addiction and in denial. I ask you to abandon this extension and see with new eyes that we're being asked to agree to construct this highway.
Thank you, Thad.
Reconsider it. Thank you.
Saeed Jamal.
City Commissioners, thank you for the opportunity. to speak. My name is Sayed Jamal. I have lived in this area for about 35 years. So one of the reasons I didn't move, my siblings came to the United States. They were on the East Coast, West Coast, did very well, but I stayed in this area. And now my son was telling me, somebody was saying that people are going to start coming to the Midwest because the coastal areas would have problems, water, climate change. So I thought I was 35 years ahead of time. Decided to stay in Douglas County because there was less pollution. I went to New York, other places, and I thought the air was clean. It was simpler, agricultural. They made fun of me. Why do you stay in Kansas? I said, well, because it's clean, it's less polluted. But now look at where we have come. So development just doesn't mean, high buildings, roads, cars, trucks, emissions. And we are on the highway to hell, like Anthony Guterres said at the climate summit recently, with the foot on the accelerator. You couldn't have put it in better words. So why should the county go ahead with something that they can wait on until 2040? Maybe look at some alternatives. I mean, everybody knows the damaging impacts on the environment that these kinds of developments can have and are having. So we are on a precipice, on the edge of it, pretty much. So we have to think about it. I mean, there are pressures, there's money, $4 billion Laura Kelly's gift to Kansas. That's, we can debate about that. Sunflower already polluted there. But, the economic benefits, all right, 4,000 people, but how many of those will live here? And if we are building a highway, roads through the fauna and flora, killing them, polluting the earth. So that is the question. I mean, why should we do this? Is there any other way? Couldn't the city grow that way? Well, it couldn't, because I keep asking people, like, why can't we do this toward Topeka? But because nobody wants to go toward Topeka, that part of Topeka is not developed. So everybody wants to go this way. They wanted to go to Kansas City. Now the pull is the DeSoto plant. I mean, I don't know how much, maybe that is a force that's pulling us in that direction. So they're talking about de-development, degrowth, and we are doing more and more development. So I'm not like the Taliban or anything that you oppose all development or technology. Technology is good, development is good, but in a sane way, so we can protect our environment. I mean, how development activities in the developed world are affecting developing countries. Go and ask them in the island nations or African nations. They're dying and we have to pay them pretty soon or they're going to sue. So, and think globally, act locally. So please do that.
Thank you, Said. Is there anybody else here who wishes to provide public comment on this agenda item? Okay, please come forward.
Good evening. I'm Michael Allman with Sustainability Action Network. And I must say, initially, after yesterday's election, I'm really pleased that I'm not addressing the good doctor up there tonight. I'm pretty optimistic that with the three of you there, that reason will prevail. So thank you. There's a design principle for road design, highway design, called the Braze paradox, BRAESS. Every traffic engineer studies it and is knowledgeable about it when they're in school. Basically what it says is that if you expand a road or if you expand a road network, rather than reducing congestion and reducing traffic, it increases congestion. You make the problem worse. That's why it's a paradox. Every engineer knows that. So in spite of Mr. Voigt assuring all of us that this road will benefit us, it's actually going to be counterproductive in that regard. And also considering how we've been reassured that this road is for access, not for development. if you put a road in, you will get development. Roads drive development. We know that. We discussed that in Plan 2040. Particularly considering that this road also includes a water line. That to me says that where's the access for the water line? Well, it's for development. And also considering that Tonya Voigt has said that I think it was a maximum of only 2 20-acre parcels that could be developed out there. Is this discounting the fact that somebody might want to buy the land at that road frontage, rezone it, subdivide it, and have it annexed? You know, these things are not set in stone. So I'm convinced that this area, which is Tier 3 in Plan 2040, not to be developed for 20 more years, that it's going to happen anyway, and there's not a way to prevent that. Even if, you know, you as commissioners don't want it, a future commissioner could approve it. So I'm as Sustainability Action is asking that you not fund this, but you fund the capital improvement plan with the exception of the Wakarusa extension and bridge for the very earliest 2040. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Is there anybody else here who would like to provide public comment on this item? Okay, has anybody raised their hand online, Sarah? Just a reminder to anybody who might be listening that if you're here for this item, please raise your hand virtually. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and close public comment and bring this back for discussion amongst the commission. Excuse me. I want to acknowledge that I understand the concerns around this particular road extension project, and they're not unfounded. I certainly appreciate the idea that that a road, any extension of a road, no matter how short or sort of minimal it is, could lead to development. And I think that given the reality and the totality of the circumstances in Douglas County right now, which we discussed really in depth at the town hall, and I know many of our public commenters were present at that town hall and participated, is that we do have regulations in place right now that that don't support the kind of development that I believe people are afraid of happening. That doesn't mean that that won't change in future comprehensive plans. That doesn't mean that the city of Lawrence won't decide to annex south, although that would surprise me, but certainly it's in the realm of possibility. In my opinion, that's within the realm of possibility with or without this road extension. I think that they could consider and make that choice regardless of Wakarusa South's extension. I also just want to respond to a lot of people have brought up the idea that we build fire and medical station. And I think that at some point after hearing from our commissioners, I would like to just hear from staff a little bit of response to that. But I think that one, the fire EMS response time is one piece of the issue. It's one reason. It's a particularly large reason, and I think it's one that is really valid for the amount of people that live in that part of the county and the road network that exists out there in and out of the city of Lawrence is something that we as a commission have a responsibility to pay attention to and figure out how to improve that access. The idea of building fire and medical station is complex for a variety of reasons, I think, but one of them, since the point was brought up earlier, the potential cost of the station and how it might be similar or the same to the potential cost of this road expansion. But I think the difference there is then you staff it. You have to staff it and the equipment and the rigs, and it's a much larger ongoing expense than a relatively small section of a road and a new bridge built to new specs that would be, have to be maintained by our public works. So I don't think that are quite the same when we consider those as just a cost comparison. And also, the county is responsible for EMS countywide. And we specifically partner with, we're in a partnership with the city for LDCFM to have fire and EMS together. And those stations are within the city of Lawrence because they are fire stations and ambulances run out of them. So a fire station, with the exception of Consolidated Fire District 1, and then, the volunteer fire departments elsewhere in the county. One, it's a very significant expense, both to build and maintain. And based on my fairly novice knowledge of kind of where, and I'm going to look to Commissioner Willie because I think that she can speak to this more eloquently, probably with her experience, but that where the sort of future of fire and medical is moving, that station-based services is not necessarily the direction or the model. And so that idea has been brought up as a potential alternative and solution to that one issue in a list of more than one issues that I think this road and bridge expansion addresses. But I just wanted to respond to some of that, and I might have more thoughts later, but welcome feedback from other commissioners.
I thought that was very well said about the potential for a fire medical station. If we had the population base to support one in that part of the county, then we would be looking at how do we have the road and bridge infrastructure to get that facility back to the city of Lawrence, because there's an ambulance station in the city of Baldwin. There's one in the city of Eudora. That's the size of population it would take to sustain an investment like that. And many more dollars than the cost we're looking at for this road, many more dollars to maintain it, to staff it, to keep it, to keep fire trucks. And that's assuming that LDCFM had any interest in a station in that part of the county, and they do not. Or that would start showing up in the city's CIP. There are a great many stop gaps for the kind of development that we're hearing people be worried about for that area. Now, whether that happens beyond the scope of Plan 2040, that's why we rewrite comprehensive plans every 20 years. And 20 years is very, very short in terms of infrastructure. And you can just see how long this has been sitting on the county's CIP, coming down the pike, saving up money for these things. There's development is a very slow process. And in this case, the Wakarusa Road extension, in my mind, has certainly no problems against the Plan 2040. I was involved with the writing of Plan 2040, and so were other commissioners here and other commissioners that served before we did. In addition, that this Wakarusa project was on their CIP for many years before now also, and no conflict was seen at that time. I do talk with quite a few people and live near people that have expected this road for a long time, and really been hurt and damaged by not having the Cassold cut through, and that had to be closed. It was unsafe. KDOT did not design for Cassold to be a safe intersection that could stay, with the intention that this was the longer term plan. And I've seen some of the plans of what an improved Cassold extension would look like, and those take up far more land, far more land farm ground that we would like to be conserving. So this to me does not rise to the level of something that that really speaks to the fears we're hearing here. What it does speak to is that these are USD 497 students that are coming and going from town along what would be a safe road here. And transportation safety, transportation efficiency, that's part of what we're tasked with as a county. And these are Lawrence students that no longer have a rural grade school. They have to come into Broken Arrow. That's their elementary school, and it's a long road. I would hate to see if the city chooses not to participate. That is a discussion for them, certainly. But really, part of what draws me to this project is the shared use path, connecting in with the Lawrence Loop, and also connecting out to the 458 highway, which was expanded and put shoulders on it because it is a bicycle corridor. And instead, right now, bicycles to get there are coming either through 59 highway under the bridge, which is highly unsafe. And I see my neighbors do it and it makes me very nervous, or across the dam road, which is also not safe for sharing with bicycles, in my opinion. The dam road gets closed pretty frequently, not just for flood events, but just, you'll come through that area and find that the road is closed and just divert traffic around back to 59 highway and all the stoplights there. So in terms of efficiency, this has been on the books for a long time. It serves a need in the community. It's been needed for some time and expected for some time. It is nice to know that, as Teresa said, we are people too, but they're not just any people. These are Douglas County citizens, residents, Lawrence School District children, bicyclists. These are our people also.
Quick, I just want to add to that I think another an important piece of this to acknowledge, and Chad, I really appreciate all the background you've been able to give us at commission meetings as well as the town hall, and the sort of history of this project as it has evolved forward for the public. And I think that something that really stands out to me about that is that, as Commissioner Willie said, this plan has been a part of the plan, a part of plans for quite some time, and it has evolved. The path that it was going to take has changed. There have been, and I think that, potentially that there is still some more changes or mitigation efforts to be seen based on the sort of concept planning and assessment, environmental assessments, cultural, assessments that need to be done there, that there is still potential for us to change and mitigate some of the potential harm of this. And I think that the evolution of how the plan has moved forward so far shows that our county staff in particular is really trying to heed all of the concerns and mitigate where possible. And that's the balance that we are charged with as a local government, to find that balance and meeting needs and mitigating potential harm and reducing that harm wherever possible. So I'm confident that that will be how this continues to move forward, because I think that we already have a lot of evidence to see that, it used to go through floodplain, and it doesn't anymore. The reason that it is where it is for a lot of particular environmental reasons, and to try and minimize the harm as much as possible while still meeting the needs of many of our residents.
So I appreciate those who brought some concerns forward, and many of you attended the session we had out at Wakarusa School, and I thought that was a really great discussion of what I would call competing values. One group can say, I'm going to elevate the part of Plan 2040 that says we need to preserve valuable farmland and environment. And that is a good value. That is an important thing. And it is in Plan 2040. But Plan 2040 is filled with contradictions. One of the contradictions in there is on page 55, which also says that we must create an efficient and equitable transportation system. So how do you balance providing an equitable and efficient transportation system if you say we can never build a road because we may be taking away valuable farmland? I think that's a big question that we have, and I want to caution us against selecting one part of Plan 2040 and saying this is what it says and this is what we must do. That's why we have these discussions, and that's why we elect people to choose among those competing values. We heard about a paradox this evening, and I want to share a fallacy. It is an association fallacy to say that because one thing happens, something else will. So just because we build a road, it does not mean that we will develop. I don't believe that. I believe that each question that we ask of our community does not, that in itself is a decision point. So if we extend this road, I do not believe that necessarily we will see development grow. I understand that that perspective and I hear that perspective, but I think that's up to the city and the county and the people that live there to express their views on whether that happens or not. We have had examples in this county where people wanted to do exactly what Michael said, build neighborhoods out in the unincorporated area. And this commission stopped that from happening. So to say that just because a road is built, that we will build a neighborhood on that road, or just because a water line is built, we will build a neighborhood on that road, there is evidence that that will not happen because people who are elected value that farmland or that rural landscape and said, we can't let that happen. And so we zoned the county and stopped it from happening. So I struggle with that argument put forward that just because we build a road, that it will cause development. One that my colleagues have not talked about, but has been represented tonight, is why now? Why is now important? And should we wait till 2040 to do the road? I would say that Chad made a good argument for it. It is an economic argument. That is partially the reason that this is a good thing to do now, is because we can take advantage of the cost savings that happen, the disruption to our community that's going to happen as we expect the SLT to expand. We asked for the reasons why we're doing this, and I think safety is a big part of it. We heard that pretty strongly at that gathering out at Wakarusa School. I don't feel like using the dam road is an appropriate choice to make for school buses, for families, for people, for bicyclists. I think we have to provide better, safer transportation networks. We heard significant discussion at the Wakarusa School about the length of trips, and that will have an environmental impact to reduce that trip length by shortening the time of that travel. So again, we're talking safety, we're talking efficiency, and the last thing that I will say is that we're talking about equity. Those are people too, yes. They're people who live in Douglas County who need to get into the city. Those who ask, like, why do we need to develop a road that's outside of the city, I think are losing the important perspective that our transportation network is built for everyone. And everyone deserves a way to get into the city of Lawrence and to get out of the city of Lawrence to their homes in a safe manner. I do recognize that it has environmental impacts, and any road we build is going to have environmental impacts. I appreciate the work Chad's group has done to try to minimize those. And we still have a ways to go in the planning process before we know exactly what the environmental impact will be. There are many more steps in this process. And I encourage everyone to stay involved and keep asking questions and keep elevating those values. Because I think when we talk about those things, we can have a good discussion and then, make decisions with those in the forefront of our mind.
I'll also talk a little bit about the 3 minutes. I am a first responder in rural Douglas County, and 3 minutes when somebody's been shot in the heart, which I've been on that call. 3 minutes when someone's having a heart attack, I've been on those calls. It matters.
I appreciate comments from both of you, and I also just want to take one more opportunity to raise up that, and this is expressed in the letter that I sent to the mayor and the city commission, that my hope is that the city will still move forward with us on this. I agree with Commissioner Willie that the shared use path has a lot of value, and I was excited about that part of the initial plan, because again, I think that's a way to just enhances the purpose and functionality of that road. And it does border almost entirely the length of it, city property and access to city recreation, as well as recreational opportunities out in the county, that's particularly in that part of the county that so many folks who live in the city of Lawrence enjoy the opportunity to get to. And I think that, that there's a lot of value in that, and that the plan as imagined in partnership with the city and KDOT allows for us to plan on more open space there too, and more opportunity to make that pathway that, I mean, it sort of already in the character of the area, and people using that particular part of the county to get to many of those recreational opportunities, to get to the lakes, and to ride bikes out there, it's a significant benefit. It's a community benefit that is both for City of Lawrence residents as well as county residents at large, in addition to everything else that's been listed here. So, any further comments?
Yeah, I'll say something about that as well. I am a little, I hope the city too will confirm their involvement in the project. Based on the conversation we've had here tonight, I'm comfortable with moving ahead with the plan because we have other steps to go before we finally approve the project. But, you know, we enter into capital improvement projects with the City of Lawrence all the time. Fire stations are probably the most, the one that comes to mind first. I can't imagine getting a fire department, and because where we don't want it put, we would pull our portion of the funding out. And that doesn't sound like a good partnership to me. And so I'm hoping the city will honor that while the majority of the length of this road is in Douglas County, just as our fire stations, most of the area that's covered is for a fire truck, not for an ambulance. I think good partnerships happen because we recognize that it's the benefit for all of us in working together. And so I understand that there are competing values on this one, again, as I said earlier, but I think it would be in the best interest of the City of Lawrence to recognize that partnership and the long-term planning that's gone into this road, and continue their funding. The bike path could potentially provide a really amazing access point around the south of Clinton Lake. Shawnee County has bike paths planned all the way down to the southern tip of Clinton Lake. And I would hate to lose that part of the project that I think could provide some real recreational benefits and transportation benefits for our community.
The other piece I'd like to have in the discussion is Douglas County is putting significant funds towards an open space plan. And what that looks like, we don't know yet, but what amount of public access that might have and flood control and wildlife corridors, this could be the way that, you know, some of that plugs back into the bike paths to the City of Lawrence. That makes for, you know, bike ped access to open space. And that's an investment that the county is making for that open space plan. And this, you know, having the city come alongside and say, this is the part of that open space that will help to pay for as part of the partnership we've agreed to, would be protecting that stream corridor as best we can with some open space there that does not exist currently. It's farmed pretty close up to the river itself at the moment. And also having the bike path that gives us, kind of jumpstarts what that open space project could maybe look like. I think we need to have that discussion part of this too. And I don't think we hold the CIP for that, but I'm really comfortable in moving forward with what we have. I know we have a lot more conversations to have, and that's true with every other project on the CIP. There are processes in place that will come back to us for further discussion. There are things we're going to want to know about environmental impacts and community impacts for each of these projects. And there's a process in place for that too. But I really commend the staff for the work that they've put into this. I love good financials. I love to see that the planning process is working its way through, and we are able to put money aside for these projects ahead of time and pay cash for these. I just think it's a lot for Douglas County to be proud of. Would
you like to make a motion, Commissioner Willie?
No, go ahead. That's why we got Commissioner Kelly and Mike.
Motion to adopt the 2023-27 capital improvement plan.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Chad and Brooke, for being here. With that, we'll move on to item 2.3. Chad, is that you? Looks like presentation for Public Works.
It may, is it you?
I'm going to take this.
Oh, boy, minimum maintenance.
All right, thank you, commissioners. This next item is the first step to begin the process of establishing minimum maintenance designation on a section of road. This is N1075 road, which is not far from the area we've been discussing. It's just south of Clinton Dam. If you've been out that way and ever cut through into the wilderness there, there are two low water crossings that exist on N1075 road. And currently the space between the two is cropland with some trees, and most of it is floodplain. There is a potential that that could be developed someday. And what we've encouraged townships all 9 townships to do is to look at areas where there are roads that are not up to standards or areas that don't provide good service like this area, and make sure that we're calling those minimum maintenance roads officially. What we've done, what we've experienced on the flip side of that is that if someone pulls a building permit on a full maintenance road and it turns out it really should not have been designated full maintenance, then either the township or the county are the ones that have to suddenly improve the infrastructure, put in culverts, bridges, improve the road. So this is certainly one of those locations, and there are currently there's some activity and interest in developing the area. So we've already made it clear that we don't believe that's appropriate, and this would be an official action to make that designation, put that in place. So a minimum maintenance designation has multiple steps. Kevin Sontag, the county surveyor, has been through this with you before. This first step would be for the commission to officially say, yes, we authorize starting the process. And the next step would be where we actually start having public comment from folks at the township meeting, folks at the planning commission meeting. Those bodies would both have to come back with recommendations to you, and then we would ask for a hearing with the county commission and additional public comment opportunity at that point. So a lot of opportunity if folks are concerned about making this minimum maintenance. That would be, in the months ahead as this plays out. I want to add that the crossing of Washington Creek currently is open and it's used daily by folks. And we, separate from, this is a little confusing, but separate from the minimum maintenance designation on the stretch of road, we actually want to recommend closing the Washington Creek crossing permanently. And really, that would be like posting a bridge, or if a culvert were to have issues where we need to close a road or something, it's more of an engineering question. And what I want to do is I've already spoken with Waukerusa Township, and they are supportive of this also. And what I want to do is get a letter out to landowners to notify them not only of the minimum maintenance process that we're about to start, but also this idea of permanently closing that crossing, and see what kind of feedback we get. We have, as was said earlier, we've recently improved the county route very close to there that provides adequate access to everybody, and removing that low water crossing would really take some concern off of my mind. And driver expectations about safety these days. A lot of young drivers have seen nothing but really good roads, and if they happen to go down that one, they're not going to find that. So that's where we're kind of headed with the big picture here, but we'll come back to you with that issue. So with that, the motion tonight would be to start the process on the minimum maintenance designation.
Any questions from commissioners?
Chad, is it the west crossing of those two, the west low water crossing that you're talking about closing permanently?
That's right. The Washington Creek crossing, the west one, it's the larger one.
Curvy one.
Very curvy. It's sort of blind. It's one lane. And if it's icy, I could see easily slipping into the creek there. There's a scour pool on the east side of that crossing that's getting very deep. The concrete culverts underneath are all cracked and coming apart. So if we were to keep it, we'd have to go work on it anyway. So the east crossing is much smaller, although it would still require a bridge to adequately cross it. If this were developed to residential standards or something in the future, that's going to be a span bridge in the future.
And will that be a separate motion that you come back for at some point? Would be the closing of the Washington Creek low water crossing?
Yes. And I'm not certain what the process would be for I guess it'd probably be real similar to posting a bridge. So just a couple of months ago, we updated our bridge posting resolution and listed every single bridge that is posted for limited loads. We're probably looking at a similar process to say we're going to close this bridge and make it no longer usable. So permanently bridge closed markers and gates and signage to keep people out.
I know we're early in the process and you just need to initiate this, but will there be a dollar figure associated with if this were to be brought up to standards for a full maintenance road with a bridge there, what that dollar cost is? Is that something that will be presented kind of later in this process, or even a ballpark?
Well, the road is already fully maintained, and so there would be no additional improvements to the road itself. But to provide adequate access for anything other than agricultural use would require at least one bridge. The more affordable option would be to cross the East Stream, the smaller one. And I looked recently, and that's around $700,000 project construction cost for a small span bridge. And then crossing Washington Creek would be similar to the other bridges we've got in that area, which would be more like 1.6 million in that neighborhood.
Thanks.
Yep.
Any questions from you, Commissioner Kelly? Okay, I don't have any questions for you either, Chad. Thank you. We'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. Is there anybody here who wishes to provide public comment on this item? Okay, anybody with the, oh, please come forward. I think I've said "ope" about 10 times in this meeting so far. I can hear it.
1096 East 1000 Road. I had joined the property that they're discussing. Just had questions more than comments, and such as we're talking about closing the bridge. Would it be removed, or is it, if it's, I heard somebody say something about gates that are locked. I spoke with the township and they had said both of those things, or I've heard both those things. There will be locks, landowners would have the keys, or they remove the bridge. And should someone become a landowner, is that bridge still accessible? That's just a question that I would have. More than anything, it's questions, but it sounds like this is just the beginning process. This isn't actually the hearing. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Chad, is there an initial answer to that right now, or just to clarify?
No, it'd be good to answer that. So the minimum maintenance designation, just take that first. What we would do there is have gate resolutions that would be located at each end of the road. The gate would be locked, and then, and this has happened in other areas of the county, the landowners that need to get in the area would have keys, the fire departments would have keys, public works would have keys, the sheriff. And so, as you can imagine, we've got rings of keys that are, you know, very large for these things, and they're located in a lot of these kind of areas around the county. And it surprises me, but it works. It's just an area that you don't want folks, you know, to come up on a minimum maintenance road and think, oh, this is great, I'm on a 4-wheel drive. And so, you know, that's the reason why we go to the extra step of adding gates. There are some that we haven't added gates, and they're just travel at your own risk. So in this case, we would see for just the minimum maintenance designation, putting gates, locking them, and then the owners have access. In terms of the stream crossing, that's, you know, kind of within that stretch that we want to actually close that crossing. We would remove all of the structure and make it an open stream again, restore the fish passage, try to armor the bank where it's being scoured, and then walk away from that. And in that case, it would be that the road is gone, does not exist. And so we would need turnarounds and some barriers to prevent anyone from actually winding up down there. So that looks a little different, but yeah, there's several steps that we're thinking about here.
Okay, thank you. For that reason, any further questions for commissioners?
I actually didn't realize that we had gates for minimum maintenance roads. I've just seen them posted as kind of a travel at your own risk kind of thing, but I see that that's not the direction that it typically goes then.
Is anybody else here? Would anybody else here like to provide public comment on this item? Okay, has anybody raised their hand virtually, Sarah? All right, close public comment and bring this back for further discussion. I am familiar with these routes. I'm a bit of a country road driver. And I like the kind of hairy drive at your own risk roads. And there's some great views that you can access in our county by these low water crossings. So, but that said, every time I've ever driven on them, I have wondered, how safe is this? And I wonder how much traffic it really gets, because it doesn't seem very sustainable, and like it really only serves the purpose of adjacent landowners. So I can appreciate that this process moving forward would help make that safer and potentially just really limit access to the landowners that need it to the area. So I appreciate that. And it's always just also an interesting part of county government to learn the process of. So I appreciate you talking about the intent and the idea around closing one of those crossings and roads completely, and that and what that might look like. So I'll be curious to see what kind of feedback you get from landowners and how folks engage in this process moving forward.
I assume there's a notice requirement that would go out within the rest of this process, that we would hear from neighbors and hear from the public during the process. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the minimum maintenance designation is spelled out in the county code, actually, and it has multiple steps. It's a lot of work for Kevin to get through all that, and it even has, we have to publish it in the newspaper multiple times, and it even specifies the weeks that you should leave between each step. So at the end of it, it's 4 to 6 months. So it'll be plenty of opportunity for discussion. Yeah.
Any further comments from commissioners? Okay, with that, I'll be happy to make a motion to approve a resolution commencing the minimum maintenance designation process for a portion of North 1075 Road in Wakarusa Township.
1 second.
All those in favor? Aye. Great. Thanks, Chad. Okay, with that will move on to item 2.4. Sarah, are you introducing this for us?
Yes, thank you, commissioners. The commission's requested that we have pretty frequent updates on where we're at with the Treatment and Recovery Center. And we've got representatives of BHP here with us tonight. And we didn't fully get time to script out who was going to talk first. So I don't know, Patrick, if you want to say a few things first, then I do have some information to share with the commission, but we want to make this just an update of where we are on things, and appreciate Patrick and the whole team being here tonight.
Great, thank you. Thank you, commissioners. I appreciate the opportunity. As I was able to provide some testimony a few weeks back about how proud Burton Ash Center is to be a part of this project, how excited we are and committed to the work needed to support the TRC success and bringing this vital array of services to our neighbors. Since our last update, we have worked regularly and very closely with the county staff towards addressing and resolving some of the feedback that they've provided for us. And we had a recent update on some of that. And so we're working through those things as well. I've spent probably more time with Sarah in the last couple of weeks than I have in a long time, and it's been very collaborative and a wonderful opportunity to work together on this stuff. And I will say I've just been real proud of the BHP leadership team, as well as the board members who have really stepped forward to begin working really, really hard collaboratively on this project and moving it towards addressing any and all concerns. I guess I really want to again stress how Burton Ash is committed to this project and working collaboratively towards the success of this. This has been a dream of our communities for years. I bought into that in my interview process, and I remain committed to it. I've dedicated my life to mental health and helping bring about services that save lives. And so really excited to be a part of that. Look forward to being able to come back here in the near future to provide more updates, and I'll stand for questions after some of my colleagues have a chance to talk. And I think Cindy's going to be next. There she went.
Hi, Cindy Ulick, and I am Chair of the BHP Board. You know, we knew that this would be challenging, a challenging undertaking. And indeed, no one's done this before. So that said, I don't think any of us had the foresight to understand just how challenging this would be. But on behalf of the BHP board, I want to share how pleased we are with the productive conversations our board has had in recent weeks with Sarah, Bob Triansky, and the others leading the effort to open the TRC as soon as possible. We're almost all here tonight. Dr. Ashley Bloom of the East Heights Clinic and Kevin Harrell of the USD 497 couldn't be here tonight, but the rest of us are here. This week, the board also had very productive meetings with the leadership of the TRC staff, the admin team, to hear their challenges and establish how the three BHP partners can assist in moving forward. Sarah was present for that, and we had a very good and candid discussion, and we will meet with that team every Monday until the center is open, and likely beyond. So I want you to know that the BHP board is committed to the hard work of making the TRC a reality. We all came to this work for various reasons and have a commitment and a heartfelt desire to make sure that this happens. Thank you.
Hi, commissioners. I'm Russ Johnson. I'm not a member of the BHP board, but an interested party, and along with Bert Nash, one of the original members of BHP. I don't want to repeat, but I maybe a little bit underscore what I think the level of productive and valuable conversation we've had over the last month with your leadership team, Sarah and Bob, and really better understanding our way forward and in a really positive way. Certainly on our behalf, LMH is really committed to this project. I know you all are too, and the work and the vision that underscored kind of this collegial collaborative effort. And our work right now at LMH, you may know, we have stepped away from the board and are working with BHP, which is giving us some direction on board nomination. And I think that's been a really positive process for us as we kind of sort out what our roles are in making this successful. And I just want the commission to know that's been smooth, collaborative, and all good, I guess. And I think a lot of our effort and work now is just continuing to understand the hurdles and the steps for opening and getting treatment to the people in the community that really need it, and supporting our medical director in that work, and appreciating his effort so much in that endeavor as well. So that's my comments, and thank you.
Well, and I think this can continue to be collaborative, but I do want to, so I want to echo the thoughts, the comments expressed by BHP board and Russ and Patrick about the work that we're doing. We are meeting very, very frequently. We are working very, very diligently to try to determine what additional, to just sort of determine readiness, and then what else needs to happen in order to get the doors open in our community as soon as possible. I do want to share, commissioners, in that spirit of trying to provide some real tangible things that need to happen before we can begin to see patients in a safe environment. I've worked with our team to really, and I think I know how to do this, and I'm not always good at it. Let me see, share my screen and just share that with the commission in the, as to some of the things that we're working on. Can I do that? Can I share that without showing you the bottom? Okay, so, and I'm not going to read all of the items on this list, But, you know, I think it's important to state that these are some very tangible, important agreements and trainings and budgets and workflows that are needed really to make sure that we have a center that can provide the best quality of care for our most vulnerable citizens. And then we are working diligently together with BHP to really take these apart piece by piece and with their attorneys to determine what we need to do to get those things together. The dates that are mentioned here in terms of are dates that were both a part of the county expressed to BHP and that BHP expressed back to us that they felt like we could get some of those things done. We have lost some time in this process and that's very unfortunate. But I do think it's important to kind of, you know, for us to just each sit down and tackle these one-on-one. The slides on this next set of issues, some of them are important for day one, for initial, you know, understanding and for those operating agreements to be in place. Some of them could wait, you know, and a full equipment and furniture inventory is not needed day one. But these are things that are going to be needed pretty quickly to make sure that we are planning and preparing for the crisis center appropriately. I've shared this information with the BHP board, county staff, and our team is, you know, already setting meeting times to meet with their teams to work through these and determine what we can get done when and what that could happen. I wish I could come to you today and say, like, we can get all this done in the next 2 weeks. And then we can set a date for opening. I don't think we're that close. My hope is that we are close to being able to figure out how long it's going to take us to get through some of these items and then be able to really come back with more understanding of what that looks like. Commissioners, I think the team's here to provide answers to questions and that you're hearing and seeing. I'm glad to do my best to try to discuss some of these items if you want to, but it was mostly just to be transparent that, you know, we are working on a pretty sizable list of things that we need to get accomplished.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you, everybody, for coming and joining this conversation with us. I'm curious, so I appreciated hearing that there was a meeting with the staff of the TRC this week and that is planned to be a regular thing. I think that's really good leadership and some foundational sort of building so that the building opens with success. I'm curious in the list of deliverables, I think most of what was up there is really, you know, the responsibility of the board to figure out, do we have all of those pieces or as Sarah said, you know, the necessary ones to open and determine which ones can happen sort of after being opened and aren't, you know, don't need to be triaged to the top. Can you or somebody from maybe Cindy from BHP give me a sense of what staff's involvement beyond Dr. Thompson as medical director, but, you know, now knowing that there's a pretty full staff in place and a leadership team, what, if any, staff's involvement in addressing some of those are? I'm just trying to get a sense of how's the work being shared. And I guess maybe the other question to that is amongst BHP board, how are those different tasks sort of being delegated amongst the expertise and the skill set that's on that board, while also remembering the potential expertise and skills that could move some of those pieces along with staff, if that's true?
Really happy to answer that question. We are actually working with the staff. I have a meeting with them tomorrow. Not just me, a lot of the other leaders to begin really digging in on some of those things and finding out, one, for our knowledge, to know exactly where things are at and what they believe are the steps they need to take to get those. In fact, I received some stuff from some of them today. I think that team is doing a tremendous amount of work and they have a tremendous amount of skill and talent. And we just need to discover what that really is and then let them get to that work. And they've been doing it. They have truly been working incredibly hard. 135 policies didn't get written by the board. Developing an inventory and making sure the building was safe didn't happen by the board. It happened by that team there. So they are a very talented team and that are working incredibly hard to address the issues and any concerns and finalize any of that work. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
I'm sure I have more questions, but I'll open it up to other commissioners.
So you've seen that list and Sarah has shared that with you and she shared that with us as well. Is there anything on that list? I mean, I think the community wants us to be open as soon as possible. And I'm not sure who to direct this question to, quite honestly. Who can tell us whether they think, what is the projected timeline that we can get these things done? I hear Sarah say we've lost a lot of time. Is there anything we're thinking on there, but boy, this is going to take a lot of time? I mean, or is there an estimate of how soon we might get some of these things? Some were agreed upon due in October and we're not there yet, or September even. Is there anyone who knows how much time it's going to take?
I'd be glad to answer some of this. And Patrick, if there's more you want to provide or other members of the BHP team, I think that's great. Like I said, I don't think we know that today, Commissioner, but I think we hope to know it soon. And to have what we think we can get done on what timeline. BHP has secured new counsel. That will be super helpful in navigating some of these agreements and looking at the agreements that were put into place. So I think that will help expedite it. County staff and county council is available to meet whenever they're able to do these things. So I don't think time is a barrier in terms of getting them done. I think it's just simply having the enough staff and the enough time to put those things together. Some of these are pretty substantial. Previous iterations of the pre-funding agreement took us a long time to negotiate. I think that's fair. And I think that's true. My hope is because we all, want to work so rapidly to make some of these things happen, that some of that can be expedited. But Commissioner, it's not days that to make those kinds of things happen. There's a number of parties involved. It's the county, BHP, Bert Nash, LMH, DECA, in terms of providing peer support. So, each of those organizations have their own organizational structure for adoption of agreements, and they each have their own legal counsel. So, getting those folks in the room to make some of those things happen is going to take some time. But I appreciate the question, and I know it's a very reasonable question that the commission has and the community has. And, my hope is that we can answer it soon.
Can I follow up a little bit? I know there are a variety of services that will all dovetail together that will happen within that building and also with partner organizations. Are there some of those that we can expect to see maybe sooner on board than others?
Yes, commissioners, I do think, again, Patrick, you're welcome to chime in here anytime you want. Yes, but a lease is fundamental to any services provided in the building that involve clients. That has to be in place. And I think depending on what the service was, portions of an operating or management agreement would need to be in place. And those are pretty big. Those are some of the bigger pieces on this list. So I think that's part of the difficulty. Do we just tackle it for one service, or do we tackle it for every service that we're trying to get into the building? Some of the issues involving the lease involve the nature of BHP as an entity. So I think like that involves legal counsel. That may require them, BHP, going back to its members, which are LMH and Bert Nash, getting feedback from them. So that takes another couple of weeks to get that kind of feedback back, and then to determine if it's agreeable to the county. But I think, well, yes, there are some things that can be done quickly. We still have to have some of these things in place before any services are provided in that building. That being said, this staff is on board today. This staff is doing tremendous work in our community today, inside the community health building at Bert Nash and inside the emergency department at LMH Health. The staff that were hired for this building are not sitting around waiting. They're working now in our community. And I think it's very important for us to share that message, and that they're gaining valuable experience and they're learning a lot of things. They're very eager to be in the building and do that work there. But it would be, I don't want anyone leaving that, like, that staff that we've hired aren't doing anything today. They're working really hard to provide services to the community.
Commissioner, I'm sorry, Patrick, if I may just dovetail off that and Sarah's response. One of my questions that I would like to hear some feedback from BHP about is the lease, and kind of what, can you help me understand why that remains an unresolved issue on that list of deliverables? Because to Sarah's point, I mean, that's a really fundamental and foundational piece of starting to make sure these services are happening within the building and in the way that they're envisioned. And so maybe you or somebody else from BHP can just speak to that a bit and help us understand. And I know Sarah mentioned that part of it is that structure of BHP, but if you flesh that out a bit.
I'll be honest, it's been a while since I have looked at that lease. And I think we've had a lot of conversations about that that have helped clear up, let's just say, misunderstanding or misinterpretation of things. I have not seen the lease recently, so I'm not going to be able to address any specifics, but I think early on, at least for Bert Nash, there was a misunderstanding of some of the language and stuff. That has actually since been cleared up for me quite some time ago. While we put that aside and worked on some other things, I actually think we, and Sarah, I think have talked, I think we can move through some of that stuff pretty quickly now that there's a new understanding of some of that language. That isn't really going to be an issue. So I hope that answers that question. Kind of to dovetail what Sarah was saying, there is some work that needs to be done, a lot of work. And what I will tell you is I have seen people drop everything to show up to do the work. I cannot even imagine the amount of time the BHP board members have spent on this, dropping so many other duties in order to show up, to be at a meeting. And as challenging as it sometimes is to get a bunch of attorneys in the room, I have been incredibly impressed with all of their willingness to say, what time is that meeting? I will be there. Let's get this work done. The urgency of this project was already big before. It got highlighted a month and a half, 2 months ago, and people are dropping everything they need to in order to show up and get the work done. It will take some time, but I think we are really moving in a direction collaboratively and solving any issues very quickly. Some of these things I don't think will take weeks. Some will take a matter of days, but that is some time. And there are a number of things. But they are working through it. And that team, the BHP team, is there doing so much work, not only in terms of service, but in this background work. They are diligently working on those things.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Patrick said. I would also say that it's, once you get these agreements in place, then it's the staff to keep them going and keep them moving. And that those are both leadership positions and or additional administrative and executive capacity inside, let's just say the TRC and to do that work. So I do think that there's some gaps in that have to be looked at and addressed. And I think the BHP board knows that. I think the BHP board is determining what's the best way to fill those gaps. And there's lots of options out there in terms of how those gaps are filled. So I think that's also something we would like more time to talk through what those recommendations would be and bring it back to the commission for further consideration. Because, it's one thing to say like, if our goal is to get open fastest, that drives a lot of the decisions about how do we get open fastest. If you're going to hire a brand new staff person, there's time in recruitment, there's time in training, there's time in orientation. And then there's, a couple more months till they figure out where the coffee pot is. And then we might have somebody where we know where things are. What of those positions are key to do with that? Or what can we rely on expertise of others in our community or perhaps outside of our community to provide that for us?
I agree.
Commissioner Kelly?
So I want to shift maybe a little bit. We've talked a lot about agreements and things that needs to be done, and I want to give, I guess we're directing everything to Patrick. So I don't know if there's, if Patrick is representing BHP, Dr. Thompson isn't here, and I think that deserves to be addressed. But my question is, there's been some questions about who holds the licensure and who actually can provide these services. And we've heard a lot, the community's heard a lot about who has to provide these services. And so I'd appreciate, Patrick, you talking about that a little bit, or maybe that's Cindy talking about it. What is specific to the license and what is specific that based on the CCBHC has to be provided by certain providers?
Sure. The only thing I was going to share is that Dr. Thompson isn't here because he's in Chicago with his daughter. So that's where he is tonight.
The application for the licensure was made on behalf of BHP, the entity that exists, right? And they are the ones who hold that license. So KDAD's provided that to them, saying KDAD's believe they are ready to go and open from that standpoint, from a licensing standpoint. They, of course, required a tremendous amount of documentation and policies in order to get there, just like they would for anybody who's going to open up a medical facility. There's a tremendous amount you submit as part of that application process, which I know has been covered. So that's who holds the license, BHP, not Bert Nash, not LMH, but the entity referred to as BHP. And there's, of course, a legal name for it, but that's who holds it.
And so if they hold it, they're the only ones that can do, I mean, and I know we're getting into the weeds here, right? So, and the public, bear with us, but the public has asked us for a lot more information than they're getting. And we can paint a picture that we're working together and everything's great, but I think we owe it to the public to sort of explain what a DCO is, who the CCBHC is, who can license that DCO, because that's what I'm hearing from the public significantly is like, give us the details of why this isn't open yet.
So the licensure to open up as a private psychiatric hospital is completely different than certification as a CCBHC, which is what Bert Nash holds, is that a certification as a CCBHC. The DCO is an agreement allowed for or required within a CCBHC if they are going to contract out a service that they are required to provide. So they're different agreements. Those are several of the agreements that there is feedback on that we are looking at and working through. And I actually appreciate the county's very thorough feedback on some of those agreements, because it does like, oh, that's a really good point we need to look at and address. And so I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but the complexity of a lot of this stuff has contributed to a delay in opening.
And I guess, and I would say too, to try to see if I can get there. It's way more than just a license to open the doors inside a crisis center. There are a number of different providers can provide the services in that center. But some of them, in order to get reimbursement through the CCBHC process, that particular reimbursement has certain strings associated with it. and certain qualifications and ramifications, both for Bert Nash and for the work that's done inside the crisis center to get that reimbursement and that piece. So it, you know, in essence, like we say CCBHC a lot, like we can go back, we can call this Medicaid, you know, I mean, in essence, that this is about Medicaid funding. And, you know, that drives a lot of this conversation here on what can be reimbursed by Medicaid. So like right now, there's only, and particularly in the mental health space, only certain providers can bill for Medicaid. In our community, that is Bert Nash. So tell me if I say anything wrong. I don't have
For
Stephen
certain- for certain
O'Neill.
thing-
for
For
behavior.
certain things in behavioral health space, only a community mental health center can provide that. And of course, only a CCBHC has the advantage of a prospective payment system, one model of payment. So you have to go through that entire process, which I think we walked through the commission earlier this year. And I think we're coming back to give you a report after the first year sometime. So.
But is that everything that
But
happens
is
in the
that
crisis
everything?
center? No.
It's not.
So it's trying to figure out what those pieces are and what we can get, how we can align. And that's why those agreements are so hard, is because it has to be done in the confines of that, but also it doesn't necessarily speak to the entire center. And this center really was designed all along to do more than just Medicaid. If we wanted to do just Medicaid, it would have been a lot easier. And so, and there are crisis centers in Kansas that are basically Medicaid and uninsured focused. So we added that complexity on ourselves because that's what our community wanted. But it also means that it takes time and talent and knowledge to make sure all those things can happen at once. And also I would say, a third-party payer market that's not used to that. They haven't traditionally billed for those services in Kansas.
We're developing a level of
Yes.
care, some of the levels of care that they are not used to providing. Our challenge and opportunity is to educate them and bring them along to understand that by providing reimbursement for that level of care, they are actually saving themselves in the long run, because a hospital admission is far more expensive than an individual being in the observation unit for 12 hours while we help them stabilize and get connected to services back out in the community. So that's a much better and more humane way of treating people. And it's definitely less costly than if they end up in an acute care setting.
Yeah, and so to kind of speak to Commissioner Willie's point, you know, if we provide a service right away in that location, but we don't have all of the details work out on other third-party payers, so what happens to that person at that time? If their insurance won't pay for that service inside the TRC, do they get a bigger bill? How do we tell them that? What does that mean? And that's why it's, you know, it may just seem like a lot of procedures and documents and things that have to get worked out, but it will affect patients day one. And it will impact like what decisions people make when they walk in the door. I would hate for somebody to walk into that facility and, you know, they're going to get the care they need and deserve, but I think it's important for them to understand the ramifications of that. And in some cases, we are working as fast as the entire state of Kansas is working to develop those types of things, because that's not how it works in other centers in Kansas.
Yes, I'm not being clear enough.
Okay, yeah, say it again.
So- And it's my fault. Bert Nash, as a CCBHC, decides who can be a DCO. Is that correct?
No, actually, the DCO arrangement has to also be approved by KDADS, who certifies us. So that process of approving the DCO with BHP had to be submitted when we submitted our application to become a CCBHC. It is a contract of a different type. Because in the CCBHC model, we have a number of services that only the CCBHC can provide. They must provide that. And the only way to subcontract that out is through a DCO arrangement. And it is a contract on steroids, because essentially the person who agrees to that essentially works as if they are the CCBHC, because they are held to the same standard that the CCBHC is, and the CCBHC is responsible for that work. So if they don't do it well, it's the CCBHC who ends up as, so that's why we're, to my knowledge, we are the only CCBHC in the state of Kansas that has a DCO, and we're one of 9. And part of the reason that KDAD's approved that DCO was because of the way BHP was structured in terms of its membership, and because, and with Burt Nash being part of it, and that a majority of the staff providing care actually work for Burt Nash. And therefore, for them, it was not a far step away from Burt Nash actually providing it, because a lot of that care is still provided through Burt Nash employees, even though they look and feel like a BHP TRC employee.
I don't think I articulated this well in my head like I thought I did, and then I just got lost a little bit in some of that discussion. I guess I would be interested in hearing from BHP leadership and the, you know, we've in kind of all of your comments in the beginning, heard a lot about how there's been really accelerated work and really more focused work in recent weeks, maybe over the past 2 months. And I know some of that has looked like BHP sort of changing the makeup of their board a bit and how they move forward. I'm curious to hear if there's anything that you can share with us and with the public about maybe some some gaps and areas that the board currently doesn't have the expertise or knowledge about yet to move forward with some of these deliverables that we saw listed. So, I just want to understand, I guess, let me back up a little bit and say, from the county's perspective, a few months ago, county administrator's decision and legal counsel was to seek some outside legal counsel and to seek some expertise from somebody outside of our community, but with in the state of Kansas with legal knowledge around medical facilities, contracts for those facilities, because we realized that that was a gap in our own expertise and legal counsel's sort of realm of experience. So, and I believe that that was a really productive decision by our county administrator and legal counsel, because it helped illuminate some of the things that have been mentioned tonight and acknowledged by you in particular, Patrick, that were things that weren't quite fully understood or appreciated, sort of the depth of work needed to get us there so that we are opening in a successful way. So I just, since so many folks from BHP showed up, which I really appreciate your participation, and that, as Patrick also said, you all have been showing up a lot lately and have really focused a lot of time and energy on moving this forward. And I'm curious if, and maybe Cindy, this is best for you to answer as president of the board, just if you can share with us and the public, maybe some areas or some even if there's particular agreements or deliverables that have been a struggle to move forward on because of lack of capacity or knowledge base yet. And if so, kind of what are some strategies being discussed to try and learn that and move those forward?
Sure, I'll try to tackle that.
I know that was a confusing question.
Yeah.
Tell me if I should rephrase anything.
No, let me give it a shot and we'll see if I answer your question. If we go back in time, we lost our first executive director. It was not a fit. It was ill-fated, and that happened, and that set us back a bit. We've tried to have iterations that filled those gaps. At this point in time, we have Russ, I think we've got how many, is there one LMH appointee that we've yet to make?
Yes.
And then Patrick, you've got, where'd Patrick go?
He's got one, I've got one. Yeah.
He's got one and you've got one. So in terms of assessing gaps, we're working on that and we're being very thoughtful about that. as we figure out who those appointees should be. And I think Sarah is in the same position. So do we have gaps? Yes. We're assessing those and we intend to fill them.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think I'm just gonna lean into it a little bit more because part of the reason I asked, and I should have said this, but I appreciate you bringing it up, those open seats, one of which the county is responsible for appointing somebody to. In thinking about that and filling those seats and making your board whole again and giving you as much capacity as possible, I'm trying to think strategically in identifying who might be a good fit for that. And that's one of 3 seats that you just mentioned. So that's part of the reason for me asking is, one, for just the sake of some good faith conversation that we all enter with some humility about what we don't know yet and what we're working to learn and lean on other people's expertise and experience for, and how can we be strategic and really intentional in filling those seats, one seat from our perspective, with the sort of skill set and knowledge base that might be really productive. So I don't know if you have any more to add to that, or if anybody else here from BHP has thoughts to share, but I'm interested in understanding that more from a really tangible perspective, kind of what are those gaps? Where is the sort of lack of knowledge base that might help push some of these things forward rather than them continuing to pass deadlines and remain on the list?
I'm not one of the appointments to make. Patrick, do you want
So
to?
let me see if I can answer that question. One of the things that I know the board is working on is developing a matrix, let's call it, of need, and what are some of the talents and backgrounds that they need in terms of board positions. So a lot of times a board will develop that list and say, we would really like somebody with an accounting background and someone with a healthcare background and somebody with a legal background and lived experience and that kind of stuff. The board, as I understand it, is beginning that work right now so that then they can inform the partners to say, here are the kind of gaps we see in terms of governance that we would like to have you think about when you start to think about people you would like to suggest to the board for consideration. I think the other part of your question really speaks more to some of the very operational kind of gaps. That is where a governance board doesn't do that typically. You know, every once in a while, a governance board steps in and does some things, but it's really the work of the team. And that is some of that work we are really digging into with the team that we started on, was that Monday?
Yeah.
With them, and we'll continue with that, is really looking at that feedback and talking with that team to help us better understand where they're at with it and what their talent, skills, and abilities are to carry forward with that. And so we should know, hopefully I think as Sarah would say, maybe in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, a real good understanding of what might still be remaining in terms of a gap. So I hope that gets to some of what you were asking.
That helps. Thank you.
And I think I wanted to also share, Patrick asks a good question in terms of who speaks for the board. Is it Patrick Schmitz? And well, as you can hear, a lot of CCBHC, DCO, a lot of this, I'm a volunteer board member. I'm a banker. So a lot of that I do have to lean on. Russ and Patrick for their expertise. They're the ones that do this work. So to that end, yeah, we'll figure out what the gaps are. And we do have, the LMH provided a really good assessment tool that they use for a rubric for their board members to assess those gaps. We're at work on that. So we're doing that work. So.
Thank you.
I'd just like to thank and recognize that you are a volunteer, your board is a volunteer board, and the grueling work that's been going on. And I just recognize how much we appreciate that work. And I know that the urgency that's expressed by the community is felt by every one of not only your board members, but all these partner organizations too. And pulling together, working together. It's been hard. It's been a rough road. We're thankful also for county staff, pulling together with this, and I know we're going to get there, and I know we're on the right track. And I just thank you for your work.
Well, and I'll just finish with, that every one of us on this board has a personal reason for doing this work and for wanting to help this be successful. And so know that we bring that with us. And whether it's a personal story or a family member, we all bring that to bear. And so it is important work, and we want to get this done.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. We'll go ahead and open this up for public comment before bringing it back for some further discussion. Is there anybody here who would like to provide public comment on this item? Just as a reminder, please state your name and residence for the record. And you'll have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Linda Davis, 221 Deerfield Lane. I'm here speaking as a member of Justice Matters. 2 weeks ago, I presented you with 184 postcards with personal messages from the Douglas County residents. We hope that you have read through those and strongly encourage you to give them your attention if you haven't. Many of them highlighted the importance of keeping the treatment and recovery center managed locally. They also highlight the cost of the TRC continuing to sit empty. Every day that it sits empty comes at a serious cost to our community. People need this behavioral health resources now. Again, we want to reiterate that when the community voted to spend our tax dollars to fund the TRC, we expected local control. We understand the value of input from national experts. We value that, but it should be as a consultant role only, not a managing the center. We have serious concerns about the continued delays and the consequences for the local collaboration if the county pursues management with connections. This process needs to continue to be transparent. I really appreciate what we heard tonight. It's really the first time that we have heard much of these details, and I think it's important to continue this transparency as we go forward. Douglas County residents are deeply invested, and so are we as Justice Matters. We were the feet on the ground for many, many years, and we continue to do so. So we're asking that we get a commitment of a timeline for the decision-making process of who's going to manage the center, whether it's going to be an outside source or if it's going to be managed locally. I think that that's hopefully an easy decision to make in the list of things that we heard today that sound much more complex. Specifically, we'd like to also see action timeframes. We saw some on those dates. Of course, the dates have passed, but we'd like to see the timeline as to where the process is in working through that list of things to be done. Hopefully through the end of December. We're in constant contact with Douglas County residents and are concerned about this issue. We will be reaching out to each of you as commissioners from leaders that are in your district. And we hope to have a further discussion on what is going on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Belinda. Does anybody else wish to make public comment?
Hi, everybody. Kirsten Kuhn, Douglas County, Palmyra Township, if you need it. I didn't mean to speak tonight, so I'm just going to throw you a couple of thoughts real quick. Regarding the apparent 33% of our board is not filled. This is the first I've heard about that tonight. I find that really concerning. And while I appreciate the thoughts about how we want folks with relevant experience to stand such a thing up, I do want to remind everybody that this is a community investment and that this project is going forward because the community supported it. I am a little bit concerned that I'm not hearing a lot about folks with lived experience on these boards, whether that be LMH, Burt Nash County. I'm not trying to point fingers, but that is something that I think maybe we need to kind of lift up at. The reporters are here, that would be the thing. And also I know that personally, and speaking right now as a citizen, but I am a member of the governing board of Burton Ash. And I know that I've been asking, Patrick Schmitz can attest, that I was very annoying all the time, asking when these TRC or BHP board meetings would be open. Now that they are, I think that maybe some outreach to the community to let them know that they can tune in now or show up would be helpful. And that might express interest or show up some interest. It can be hard for us community members who have real lives all the time and children and jobs to show up, but that might be a way to kind of increase engagement. As it was set up here, operations are different than board governance. I think that's very important. Another one thing that I actually was pretty sure I was going to say is I would like to hear more about the operational timeline for the architectural remodels. That does seem like very simple things to get us in compliance with the psychiatric licensure, plumbing and door frames. And I'd like to know if that is in any way undergoing, if we have a time frame on that. And I'm sure that I had a third thought, but I've lost it. So 1 minute to go. I'll save you the time. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kirsten. Does anybody else here wish to provide public comment on this item? Okay, has anybody raised their hand online, Sarah? No. Okay, thank you. We'll close public comment and bring this back for some further discussion amongst commissioners. I just want to, well, Kirsten, to your point, I want to acknowledge that you're right. The discussion about lived experience and what role that voice plays both in BHP's Board of Governance and I think just the operations of the TRC and the whole crisis continuum in our community moving forward is a topic of discussion that we have not given much time to publicly, I think. And so I appreciate you bringing up that point and think that it is something to be addressed, especially upon the center operating and making improvements as it moves forward with those operations based on the experiences of people who will use those services.
Sure, if I may. So I was invited to the last full board meeting of BHP just a short time ago. And that was actually a very large part of the conversation was the role of lived experience on the board and in the work. I would also kind of add to that, is there really anyone here who does not have lived experience with mental health concerns or crisis? So I just want to flag that part of this process is normalizing mental health and discussions around mental health. So that's not a token person, that's everybody. And that's my comment. That's not necessarily the discussion of the board, but just to say that they take that very seriously and that I was in for that conversation. I would also say that, we're asking partner organizations to come to the public with great transparency, and that's part of what we've been hearing tonight. But I also would ask the public to receive that with grace, to offer grace and extend grace to the people who are doing this work. And that's part of that normalizing mental health too, is that these folks that are doing this work on behalf of the community, we need to value them and value their service and recognize that, we have a lot of questions. And believe me, we only, the tip of the iceberg for questions that we have and that the community has, but we're also balancing that with how do we extend grace to people who are working very hard to answer these questions, celebrate the wins, and also keep asking those questions to help us move forward.
There are a couple of things mentioned in public comments we heard that I do just kind of want to raise up as questions, and maybe I'll direct them to you first, Sarah, and if you want to invite other folks to join it. I think so. One thing we heard was asking for a commitment of timeline about the decision of who will manage it. And I think, in particular, which this wasn't intentional on my part, I don't think it was intentional on any of our parts, but none of us asked questions about Connections. And so just to mention that elephant in the room, that Connections still serves as a consultant for us. And as I understand it, has been in regular conversation with the TRC director still, Dr. Thompson, as well as county and I believe BHP. So I think that maybe addressing what that relationship and connection to Connections looks like currently, and to maybe just address the question of a timeline around the decision of who will manage it. personally, my perspective about that is that there's a lot of information to still be gathered in order to understand what those options are in front of us. And we talked a lot about that this evening, and there are a lot of moving parts to that. And so I'm not confident that a sort of separate timeline can be determined for that any more than to Commissioner Kelly's question earlier, to sort of press the urgency of what the community is wondering, which is when will we be open and how can we quantify that? Can we? At this moment, I don't think we can quantify that with much specificity, but Sarah, do you have anything that you want to add to that or respond to that, those questions coming up?
Yeah, I'll try. I'm thinking back to Commissioner Kelly's words about competing values. The value of a locally managed center is definitely a value that has been expressed by the community. Another value that has been expressed is getting open quickly. I'm afraid at times they're in opposition. And I think the commission's going to have to judge some of those things. There, as outlined, there are significant gaps in terms of the administrative and executive structure that has to get filled for people to be safe in this building. And I think that's important to talk about here, that this is a $6 to $8 million operation that will save lives. It is just as treacherous from an administrative perspective, in my view, as a jail in terms of the safety of the people that are inside of it. So that's how I look at it as an administrator, as to how that this is of the utmost importance to us, that people are safe in this facility and that they have the kind of protections in place. We are in ongoing conversations with Connections, but our driver has not been who make a decision on the operator. Our driver has been, what is best needed to operate this facility in Douglas County as soon as possible, and who can do that the best and who can do that the quickest. So that's really where my orientation has been. If the commissioners would rather us direct it to deciding that question first without sort of getting more information on those factors, I think that's something we could pivot to that conversation. But the conversation has not been about, Connections versus anyone else. The conversation is, at this point in time, in my mind, is what is needed to get the TRC open safely and sustain safely, and who can best provide those services, and how long will it take to get there? I know I was probably.
That's great. I appreciate you responding, and I would, if it's okay with other commissioners, I would invite if anybody from BHP wishes to add anything to the specific question around what the communication with and collaboration with Connections has looked like recently. But other than that, I'm open to hear other comments from commissioners.
So I want to address some of the comments that were made, make a few, but before I do, first, I want to thank the BHP board for being here. And I want to second what Commissioner Willie said about gratitude for your service, your volunteers in this space. You've been asked to do more. I appreciate it. Trying to make eye contact with all of them. So I do appreciate it. And and at the same time, I understand where Belinda is coming from, and that desire to see what we expect from those who are in authority. We sit up here in a position of authority and you want to see something happen, right? We were voters. Kristen asked the same thing. This is what we voted for. This is what we want to see happen. So you want to make sure that it's transparent, that you're getting all the information, that there's order, that you're understanding what's happened there. You want to make sure you're protected. You want to make sure that it's not someone from outside of this community. You want to hear that protection from us. And I understand that design. And then you want direction. When's it going to open? Right. So those are the things that you want to hear. And I think it's important for our partners to hear that as well, because if we're hanging that and saying, the protection we want is that we use local operators for the TRC. If that's the protection that we want, then we may have to sacrifice some time to make that happen. That might be what happens. We may not be able to have it all. And that's hard to hear because we want it all, right? We want it open yesterday. We don't want anyone to suffer. We want it open perfectly, right? Everybody wants that. We want an incredibly transparent process, but we also want to give grace to those who are doing really difficult work and quite honestly on a high wire here because we haven't done this before. I think all those things are fair to ask for and they're human emotions and it's totally understandable. What we have to understand is that those things make this work really difficult. You heard the complexity and some of the questions I was asking are, Patrick, and thank you for taking them and hanging in with me as I kept pushing, because I think the community needs to hear how complex this is. They're looking for that order. You're looking for, I need to, and then when it gets really complex, you're like, go figure it out and get me what I want. I get that. Not exactly, but I understand that we want to make progress on this. We want to get to it. And we want to make sure that it's done in the right way with the right people. And so I guess what I'm saying on all this is what we're trying to do here, what the BHP board is trying to do with open spots. We're trying to all figure out what a CCBHC is and what a DCO is and what licensure is allowed and what all the different organizations will do. And we all want it open tomorrow, right? And so I think that's really where some conflict is here and where there's pressure and tension is we want to just wave a magic wand and say, it's ready, let's go. But I think we also need to make sure that, as Sarah said, it's open safely, not only for the people that go there, but the people that work there as well. We need to make sure that all those agreements are in place so that we don't open it and say, well, we didn't think about that, boy, we better fix that now. Some of those things, of course, will happen, but others, I think we need to do our due diligence on the front side to make that work. So it's a tough conversation, folks. It is really tough. I get that, Cindy.
Yeah, I just wanted to share that it's the elephant in the room, connections. This board has agreed that we may need some advice from Connections, and we're willing to accept that if, in fact, we can, as long as they bring value. And I think that requires timeframes, and that requires, okay, is it 6 months? Is it 12 months? But we should only be engaged with them as long as they bring value. And so I don't want you to come away thinking we don't want anything to do with Connections. We're willing to work with them. I don't know that we know what they're willing to do at this point, and what that looks like. But I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Cindy. Any further comments from commissioners? I just want to echo what Commissioner Kelly just said, and this is a tough conversation and an ever evolving one, obviously. So just want to appreciate the time everybody took to come join us this evening, in addition to all the time that I know you've been working diligently day in and day out on progressing this. So, and I also want to thank those in the public who have continued to engage with us both in our meetings and outside of our meetings and ask important questions, express valid and significant concerns, and really engage in some kind of nitty-gritty conversation. I've had some really incredible, albeit hard at times, kind of nitty-gritty conversations with people about the nuances and the complexities of all the things that we've discussed this evening. And for me, the value add of that is that we have more people in our community thinking about and talking about and wondering about and trying to figure out together, how do we move forward towards this shared vision that without question, is one that Douglas County voters gave a mandate for and have been really instrumental in moving forward what the vision and the idea of what this center and its services can mean for our community, and all of the things that that connect to that and that are interrelated to the services of the TRC. And that I bring that up to say that a lot of my conversations in recent weeks also have been, I think, really illuminating for me. And I say this as I'm a service provider in this community. So sometimes I take for granted how much I know about the services available and the resources and how to connect to them, and how to help my clients connect to them. And recent conversations have really helped me realize how sort of in a bubble I am in that sometimes, and that there are a lot of people in the community that don't know the available services currently, the resources that are operating and functioning already, and how we hope to grow and build upon those so that we have a real crisis care continuum that is focused on being able to meet the needs of the most vulnerable and the most acute issues that community members are facing, so that we are able to meet everybody on the spectrum of experience with mental health and substance use crises, to really be able to make sure that our services are foundationally working. If we can meet the needs of the most vulnerable and the most acute patients and community members in our county, then we should be able to meet the needs of everybody, whether it's a one-time crisis or cyclical crisis. And so I believe that we're having a lot of really great conversations in the community because of this, even though they are tough and they're emotionally loaded. I've been grateful for the opportunity to learn some of my own blind spots and to be able to help engage in conversation with community members, kind of about the totality of circumstances around the TRC in particular, and that wider, larger community-wide vision of having really effective and integrated crisis services for folks in our community moving forward. So without any further comment from commissioners, this is just, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but there is no action to be taken on this item. This is on our agenda just for the sake of having discussion and being able to share information amongst the public. So with that, that closes out our regular agenda. And again, I want to thank folks who came to join us. If you'd like to stick around, we have some miscellaneous items to speak about at the end. But first we have appointments. And I know talked about last week waiting for the appointment for CJCC. Sorry, my words left me. And I was really happy to see a letter of interest. I'm always excited when folks initiate interest in serving on any boards or commissions, and the CJCC is certainly one of really important work. And so if it's okay with agreeable to other commissioners, would be really happy to make a motion to appoint Chastity Schaefer, who expressed interest in joining the CJCC as a community member with lived experience. And I've sort of known Chastity over the years and seen her work in action and doing the kind of peer support work and recovery and action work that I think is really central to all of what we're talking about this evening. So I was very excited to see that she had interest and think that she'll bring a lot of value to CJCC.
Second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, great. Commissioners, will you remind me if there are other appointments that I didn't write down? Okay.
I don't think so. I do still owe you an update on the Peasley appointments. I keep thinking I'm gonna get that done. But I will try to make that a priority so that the commission has that information. Because we have had a number of people step forward and express interest in serving on that board. So that's a good thing.
Good to hear. Okay, thanks. Well, with that, I turn it over to you, Sarah, to walk us through your memo and anything else you'd like to share.
Thanks, commissioners. Just, we added some different, a new date. I think this is new, but just in light of the events of yesterday. The general election canvass is scheduled for Monday, November 21st at 9 a.m. at the election office. If you cannot be there or you will not be participating, we need to get a delegate to serve as a canvasser. And then there's some really great updates that Jill and the Human Services team added to the memo this week in terms of some human service program updates. We don't need to go through them tonight, but just if you have questions on those, I know Jill's available to answer those. An update on the sources of income ordinance that's being considered by the city of Lawrence and how important that is to the work we're doing in terms of housing. And then some updates about the Housing Stabilization Collaborative. As commissioners know, the amount of funds available for homelessness prevention is what I'm going to call it. Is dramatically less now because of the role of what we were using CARES Act funds for that work. So the demand is still pretty high and those funds are moving out of the door very quickly. So I think there's some interesting information there that you might like. Next week, we do have a work session planned for the supportive housing project, just as a bit of an orientation. This was a project that was brought forward during our ARPA considerations this summer. It was not funded in terms of ARPA because we thought we could potentially, and it had always been kind of envisioned as perhaps a use of the behavioral health sales tax funds. So I think we're going to re-update on that conversation and ask the commissioners if they need more information before we try to make some decisions on that project. So Jill's working on getting all that together. Commissioner Reed and I both will not be here next week. So I'm going to do my best to keep that agenda light for the 5:30 meeting. And then just as a reminder, the commission is not meeting on the 23rd. So our next opportunity, then we'll have everybody back together on the 30th. And commissioners, that's all I have.
And just to add to that, next week we'll be here again. Is that right?
I'm planning on that we will be here through the end of the month.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to.
Their fans are still blowing in the commission hearing room. And I think they're going to be blowing for a bit time longer. And we still are awaiting additional quotes on the replacement of the AV equipment and what it would take to do that. Everything that involves a microchip has a delay these days. So we're still weeks away from getting that information.
Thanks. Just wanted to reiterate that for public especially. And Commissioner Kelly, since I won't be here next week, please sit here. Or convince Commissioner Willie to switch with you. I also just wanted to acknowledge in the election yesterday that the question about moving to a 5-member commission has passed. And so now we have a little bit of a quick timeline ahead of us. And so I know staff are working on figuring out at least one, maybe more than one sort of town hall listening session type opportunities to really get feedback from the community about what those 5 new districts might look like, because state statute requires that by January 1st, our county clerk, the county commission will pass a resolution for the county clerk to be able to submit those new district maps to the state. And then the next step beyond that is sort of out of our hands, and it'll be up to our governor to determine if 2 new commissioners will be elected in a special election or a general election. So please stay tuned because those dates will come up quickly. I would think that probably in the next week or so, we will have been able to land on those dates and start announcing them and inviting the public to join us for some more conversation.
appreciate you mentioning that, Commissioner Reed. Yeah, my goal would be to try to nail down that date soon and share that so that we can get a great turnout for those conversations. Right now, staff is thinking it would be run in a town hall forum similar to what we did for the Wakarusa Road Extension Project, where we'd invite community members to sit at small tables and have facilitated discussion about what's important to them after a brief presentation by the county clerk on the process. So that's what my plan is at this point.
Also, I know that there's a set of rules that we have to go by for creating those districts. If that information can get out to the public ahead of the time of the town hall and people can start thinking about what their values are within the context of what we're legally able to do with districts.
Well, it's a pretty short list. They need to be populationally balanced. That's the distinction. So
Geographically
and
contiguous.
and geographically contiguous.
There we go.
So those are the two things they have to be.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, you can't have one district that's 5,000 people and one district that's 70,000 people, and they can't, we don't want to gerrymander our own districts either in terms of geographic. Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Any other miscellaneous items for the good of the order, commissioners?
First, I want to thank our county clerk, Jamie Shu, and his entire election staff and all the volunteers. I think, we see, because we hear from Jamie every year, come budget time, to walk us through all that takes place in elections, and it is a huge load. And Jamie's going to bounce right out of that into redistricting. So I just want to say, express my gratitude, and I'm sure other commissioners feel the same, for our election staff and for all those volunteers, all those poll workers, all those observers out there. We have a wonderful democratic process. And so we've heard a lot in here over the last couple months when it comes to democratic process and what that should look like. And I will say that there's been a lot of ugliness in our chambers and talking about elections and values and things like that. And I really rely on that democratic process to send a message on what we expect when it comes to inclusivity and purposeful leadership. And I am disturbed by the amount of name calling and marginalization we hear. And I think it's important that we all, not just those here on the commission, not just staff, but our entire community, take a moment to reflect if that's what we want. And I think we all have a responsibility to make sure that those who want to talk about ideas, that we can respect multiple perspectives and lots of different ideas, but we don't have to do it through intimidation. We don't have to do it through degrading people. I think there's a way we can have a better dialogue. But it's going to take all of us having that expectation to make sure that we're really talking about ideas, and that's the kind of democratic process that I want. And I think based on the vote yesterday, that's what our community wants, and we owe it to our community. Our community can do better, and we owe it to our community to expect something more. So I just think that's important to say, because we've had such divisive dialogue in our public comment sections and on agenda items. I thought it was important to say that.
Thanks for that, Commissioner Kelly. Commissioner Willie?
I appreciate you saying that. I love hearing from the public. I value hearing from the public. I don't feel right moving on until we have heard from the public and there are eyes and ears for what they want government to be doing. And so, but not only that, I want people to feel safe to come be in the space to offer that public comment. And I think that's something that we have not been able to secure. So I think we have work to do.
On that note, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.